Hello, and welcome to Poleasy, the series that's all about making policy debate easier to learn for novices, for coaches, and even for varsity. This is the sixth part of this series that is going to be all about counterplans. If you haven't already watched the earlier parts about introduction to policy debate, affirmative and negative basics, disadvantages, and topicality, I would strongly suggest watching those before you watch this because we're going to kind of skim over the concepts learned in those videos. With that being said, plan for today is to learn all about counterplans. So first thing is, what are counterplans, also known as CPs? So counterplans are off-case arguments presented by the negative in the first negative constructive. And a counterplan argument claims that there is an alternative and preferable way to solve the issues brought up by the affirmative. So you'll notice that there is no stock issue for counterplan, but you can use a counterplan to answer the stock issues of solvency and disadvantages. And if the negative can prove that the affirmative plan trades off with a better option, then they will win the solvency and maybe the disadvantaged stock issues. So one thing to note is that counterplans are defensive opportunity cost arguments. You say that we have the opportunity of doing the affirmative plan and we have the opportunity of doing the counterplan. If we take the opportunity to do the plan, then we lose the opportunity to do the counterplan, which is why the plan becomes a bad idea. So reading a counterplan also means that presumption flips negative. Now remember that presumption is the idea that if at the end of the debate there's a plan versus the status quo and the judge doesn't know who to vote for, they're supposed to default to voting for the status quo as an object in motion stays in motion. But by reading a counterplan, you are also rejecting the status quo. So presumption flips. If there's a tie, essentially the judge is supposed to vote for the affirmative. The counterplan has five-ish parts, although many teams will only read the first two in the first negative constructive because that's much shorter, but they have to win all five parts in order for the counterplan to win them the debate. And that is the text, the solvency advocate, mutual exclusivity, net beneficial, and theoretical justification. And we're going to go each of those parts in depth before talking about how to answer those as the affirmative. So in order to explain the concepts, we're going to use the analogy of Bob, Sally, and fast food as an analogy for counterplans. So Bob represents the affirmative, Sally represents the negative, and Alex represents the judge. The resolution is we should eat at a burger restaurant. The affirmative says, let's eat at Burger Queen, and the negative says, let's eat at Dairy King. So these four pictures kind of demonstrate the fundamental premise of the counterplan. So the text, let's go to Dairy Queen, that is what Sally is proposing we do instead of what Bob as the affirmative says. The solvency advocate is who says that this is a good idea, and Sally says that her friend told her that Dairy King is delicious. The third part is mutual exclusivity. You have to prove that you can't do both at the same time. So Sally says we don't have enough time or money to go to both Burger Queen and Dairy King, so we have to make a choice. And then she proves that it's better to go to Dairy King than Burger Queen because it will fill us up more, it will cost less money, and it's healthier. So the first part of a counterplan is the text because we have to be specific if we want our counterplan to win in the debate. So with the counterplan text, it's the specific thing that you are advocating for as an alternative option to the plan. In our fast food analogy, Sally countering Bob's Burger Queen suggestion with Dairy King is the counterplan text. And reading counterplan evidence without a text is like shutting down a suggestion of where to eat without having an alternative. So you can't just read evidence that says doing something else is a good idea. You have to have the actual suggestion behind it. Which brings us to the second part of a counterplan, and that is the solvency advocate. This is when Sally says that her friend told her Dairy King is delicious. The solvency advocate is the source that supports whatever action your counterplan says we should take. You want to have a piece of evidence that says the counterplan is a good idea. In the fast food analogy, Sally bringing up that her friend loves Dairy King is her solvency advocate. So reading a counterplan without a solvency advocate is like suggesting a plan for dinner with no reason why you expect it to be a good place to eat. Which brings us to the third part of the counterplan, and that is mutual exclusivity. So this is where Sally proves that we don't have enough time or money to go to both places at once. So mutual exclusivity proves your counterplan can't be done at the same time as the affirmative plan, which is what makes the counterplan an opportunity cost, i.e., if we do the plan, we can't or shouldn't also do the counterplan, and that is bad because we lose the opportunity to do the counterplan. In our fast food analogy, Sally says we can't do both, and that's how she proves they're mutually exclusive. And if you read a counterplan that isn't mutually exclusive, that's like saying you shouldn't drink water because you also have to breathe. Doesn't make very much sense. Fourth part of a counterplan is you have to prove that it is net beneficial. So to be net beneficial just means to be better overall. The counterplan can't just be as good as the affirmative plan, it has to be better than the plan. And that's because if you read a counterplan, you're giving up on defending the current world or the status quo. And the negative becomes the one with the burden of proof for their counterplan. So you have to be able to overcome a tie, because if there's a tie and you read a counterplan, presumption goes to the affirmative team. And there's two ways to prove that you are net beneficial. The first way is on solvency. So you prove that the counterplan is better at solving the affirmative team's harms and advantages. So you just say, we do what they do better. Or you can prove that you're net beneficial by avoiding a disadvantage. You prove that the counterplan does not cause a disadvantage, but the plan does cause it. So because you prevent a bad thing from happening by voting for the counterplan instead, you are better than the plan. In our fast food analogy, Sally says that Dairy King is better than Burger Queen because it will fill us up more, which is a solvency net benefit, because Bob was saying, oh, we should go to Burger Queen because it will help us not be hungry. Sally says, actually, Dairy King will do even better at that because we can get more food. And also says that Burger Queen is gross and unhealthy. So those would be disadvantages. So because Dairy King is not gross and unhealthy, it is a better option than Burger Queen. If you read a counterplan without a net benefit, you're disagreeing for the sake of disagreeing. You're playing devil's advocate, but being that annoying kid in class who does so. Fifth and finally, for counterplans, they have to be theoretically justifiable, or they shouldn't be cheating, essentially. So a counterplan has to not be bad enough for fairness and education in the debate so that it would justify voting for the affirmative. So some example of theoretical justification issues include conditionality, multiple actor fiat, plan-inclusive counterplans, non-topicality, consultation, solvency advocate missing. All of these are issues that could create a theory argument. However, the negative does not read anything about theory on their own counterplan in the first negative constructive. The affirmative would initiate a theory argument in the second affirmative constructive. It's kind of like how the affirmative doesn't mention the topicality of their plan in the first speech. The negative doesn't mention the theory behind their counterplan in the first speech. It's kind of like it's assumed that you were being fair and educational until somebody says you weren't. Next, let's look at an example of a counterplan through the idea of drinks. So let's say the topic was Coach Abby, who is my assistant coach, should bring Coach Smith a soft drink. And the affirmative plan underneath this is that Coach Abby should bring Coach Smith a Dr. Pepper. So they picked a specific example. And they say it's a good idea for 3 reasons: that it will be refreshing, that it will give me lots of energy, and that it will improve our friendship. So if the negative wanted to read a counterplan to this, they could read a protein shake counterplan with all 5 parts. So first, specificity. Coach Abby should bring Coach Smith a protein shake. That's the counterplan text. Second is solvency. You have to prove that it would actually work. So you say protein shakes are refreshing. They help rebuild muscle, and bringing one will make me feel appreciated. So protein shake solves all the stuff that a Dr. Pepper solves. For non-topicality, this is kind of like the theory idea that counterplans should not be able to be part of the resolution. So this would be kind of preempting a theory argument. You could say that protein shakes are not soft drinks because they aren't carbonated. Net beneficial, why is the counterplan better? It will make us feel strong. They're more expensive, which boosts friendship signals more, and it avoids the empty calories disadvantage. So you could read a disadvantage against Dr. Pepper that says it's a lot of extra calories for no nutritional value, which doesn't apply to the protein shake argument. Finally, why can we not just do both? It's mutually exclusive because Coach Smith can't drink both a soft drink and a protein shake at the same time, and Coach Abby doesn't want to spend the money on both. So there is an example of a counterplan with all of the different parts. Now, in the debate round itself, they would probably only read the specificity or the text and the solvency advocate. And the rest of the stuff would just be things they're ready to say for later. But if you're only wanting to read maybe 2 or 3 off-case arguments, it might be worth it to add some of these other things in your first negative constructive, because the 2AC will have to answer those before they can make their own answers. So now that we know about the parts of a counterplan, what are the different types of counterplans? And I have 10 different types of counterplans to explain. You don't have to have all of them memorized or understand them perfectly, but this should just give you an idea of the different kinds of counterplans that you might read or encounter. So the first kind is actor or agent or object counterplans. And this type of counterplan is all about who is involved. So the first kind is an actor counterplan, and that is changing the organization that does the plan. So for context, remember in our initial analogy of Alex, Bob, and Sally, Alex is trying to take Bob and Sally out to eat somewhere. Alex represents the judge, Bob is the affirmative, and Sally is the negative. So if that was the case where Bob and Sally's parents, as part of their resolution, were taking them out to eat, an actor counterplan would say, let's have the neighbor take us out to eat instead, because that would be somebody outside the family. So the action is the same, but the group doing it is different. Then you have an agent counterplan, which is very similar to an actor counterplan, only you're just changing the specific part or piece of the organization that does the plan. So Alex, who is one of Bob and Sally's parent, in the original plan is taking them out to eat. So an agent counterplan might have their dad take them out to eat instead as a different person in their family. So still part of the same family, but a different part of the family is taking them out to eat. Finally, we have the object counterplan, and that is when you change the organization or the group that the plan is targeted towards. So if Alex is taking their own kids to eat right now, then the example object counterplan would say maybe Alex should take their nieces and nephews to the restaurant instead of Bob and Sally. So with these counterplans, you're changing who or what is involved. Then we have advantage or uniqueness counterplans. So these are used to take care of specific advantages or disadvantages going on in the debate. So an advantage counterplan solves one of the affirmative's advantages, but not others. And the reason why you would read this is to basically avoid having to actually answer one of the advantages. So you can just say that you have a counterplan that solves for it, and you can basically move on. So for example, if Bob says that going to McDonald's as the affirmative lets them not be hungry, get toys, and spend time together, one advantage counterplan would be go to the toy store. If you read a go to the toy store counterplan, that might not solve the hungry or the time together argument, but it would definitely solve the getting toys argument. Or you could also read an advantage counterplan of going to the park, which would solve the spending time together advantage, but maybe not the hungry or getting toys advantage. So whichever ones you didn't solve for, you would have to have more specific answers to. And then a uniqueness counterplan is very weird and not very common, but the idea is that sometimes the negative wants to read a disadvantage that has uniqueness problems, where their description of the status quo isn't very strong, and the affirmative probably has good answers like no uniqueness. So for example, let's say that Sally as the negative wanted to read an expensiveness disadvantage with a debt impact. So she wants to say we shouldn't go to McDonald's, or we shouldn't go to Burger Queen because it's going to cause us to go into debt. That argument isn't as strong if the family is already in debt. So you could fix that disadvantage by reading a uniqueness counterplan that says pay off the family's credit card. Because if you paid off the family's credit card and then you tried to go to McDonald's, then that would cause the expensiveness disadvantage to happen and still have uniqueness. The next group of counterplans is about whether it includes or excludes part or all of the plan. So these are called PICs or PECs. So a PIC or plan inclusive counterplan is a counterplan that does part but not all of the plan. So it cuts something out that the affirmative originally said the plan would do. So for example, if Bob says let's go to McDonald's or Burger Queen or wherever and get both a burger and an ice cream cone, if that was the plan, an example of a plan inclusive counterplan or a PIC would say let's go to McDonald's but only get the burger. So you're cutting out part of the plan. The other kind is a less common, and that is the plan exclusive counterplan. And that is a counterplan that cannot include any part of the plan, or it does the opposite, which is what usually happens in this type. So for example, Bob says, let's go eat at McDonald's. And as a plan exclusive counterplan, Sally says, let's never eat fast food again, because those two things are completely separate. You're basically doing the opposite of eating at McDonald's. The final types of counterplans are what I would call cheater counterplans, but that is just my opinion. These are delay, conditions, and process counterplans. So a delay counterplan basically says do the exact same thing that the plan does, but do it later, a week later, a month later, a year later than they originally said they would do it. And an example of a delay counterplan would be Sally says, let's go get McDonald's tomorrow instead of today so that we can avoid an accident causing traffic up ahead. A conditions counterplan is another type of, in my opinion, cheater counterplan. And that says do the plan, but on one or multiple conditions. So an example would be Sally says, let's call dad and make sure it's okay before we go get McDonald's with Alex. So you're saying, let's do the plan, but do one little tiny thing first. And then you have a process counterplan, which is do the plan, but change it a little bit so the teacher doesn't notice. That's how I feel about it. But a process counterplan is doing the action of the plan through a different method. So, for example, Sally says, let's go get McDonald's, but we'll take a different car, or we'll drive a different route, or we'll enter through a different entrance, or you basically do the plan, but you change it around a little bit. So why are these counterplans cheating to me? I think it's because they basically say, let's do the affirmative, but in a funny hat. That's how different the difference between the plan and the counterplan is. To me, these counterplans are bad because they discourage clash, they discourage research, and they steal AF ground. You don't have to debate the specific aspects of an affirmative case. If you can just change something a little teeny tiny bit and prepare to debate that teeny tiny bit instead of the whole affirmative plan. And you also don't have to research specific cases in that case. You just have to know your counterplan really, really well. You also steal the affirmative's ground because you agree with 99.9% of what they have to say. And that means that the affirmative can't use that in the debate, which makes it not very fair for them, in my opinion. Granted, when I was in high school, I read all three of these types of counterplans at least once, and that's why we have theory. So if you can win the theory argument on this counterplan, then you are good to go reading them. Now we know what the different kinds of counterplans are. So how do we actually answer a counterplan? There are 4 main steps, and you can remember those steps through the acronym of POST or STOP. So, step 1 is to permute the counterplan or to make a permutation argument. This answers the mutual exclusivity part. So, a permutation proves that the counterplan isn't an opportunity cost to the affirmative's plan because it can be done at the same time as the affirmative plan. There are many different types of perms. The most common is perm do both the plan and the counterplan. Then you have perm do the plan, then the counterplan, perm do the plan and part of the counterplan, perm do the plan through the process of the counterplan, perm do the plan but lie and say you're doing the counterplan. Remember that permutations of all of these different forms are not creating a new world that the judge can vote for. They are a type of competition. Competition is the idea of do these two things compete to create different opportunity costs? So think of it like a Venn diagram. You're not creating a third circle separate from the affirmative plan and the counterplan when you read a permutation. You're saying that there's space in between where there's overlap of our plan and the counterplan, and that if we can prove that that overlap is good, then we should win the debate. So all of these different permutations would have different functions and work differently against other types of counterplans. So you should always be ready to explain what type of permutation you're going for. Don't just say the word perm and then move on. The second way to answer a counterplan is to read offense against it. And this is how you answer the net beneficial part of a counterplan. So you need to prove that the counterplan causes problems that your plan does not cause. So for example, this could look like reading a disadvantage against the negative counterplan. So maybe Bob says that the Dairy King counterplan is actually a bad idea because they are mean to their workers, or because it causes more climate change because there's so much more milk products or something like that. So you say the counterplan causes something bad to happen that our plan doesn't cause. The other way is to link or impact turn the net benefit. So if you remember from before, Sally said that Burger Queen was better, she said that Burger Queen was worse than Dairy King because it was gross. So if you can prove that it actually isn't gross, that it's really good, then that would be a way to turn the net benefit. So now instead of being a reason why the counterplan is better, it becomes a reason why the plan is better. Third way to answer a counterplan is to read solvency deficits. So this is where you explain that the counterplan does not solve your harms or your advantages as good as your plan does. So Bob says that if we go to Dairy King, it's just going to be empty calories. It won't fill us up. Whereas if we go to Burger Queen, then we will definitely feel full afterwards. So it does a better job at solving than the counterplan does. Fourth and finally is theory. Now, theory arguments say that the counterplan is so unfair or so uneducational for debate, it is therefore theoretically illegitimate and should lose them the debate. There's not really a way to make that analogy make sense for Bob and Sally, but here are some different common kinds of counterplan theory arguments. Conditionality is about the status of your counterplan. So whenever you read a counterplan, you have to ask yourself as the negative, are we going to go for this counterplan the entire debate, or could we get rid of it at some part if we feel like it's not our strongest argument? If you say, no, we will not get rid of it and we will talk about it for every single speech, then you are being unconditional. If you're saying, meh, we might get rid of it if we want to, you are being conditional. And some teams will say that conditionality is bad and unfair. Some counterplans have different countries or different governments or multiple organizations do the plan instead of just one government. And you could read a theory argument as the affirmative that says that that is unfair because it doesn't make any sense. Nobody would ever be in the position where they either choose between the US government doing something or another group of governments doing something. If the judge is supposed to pretend to be a US policymaker because a US policymaker is who would be able to do the plan, how could they make a decision as a US policymaker for another country to do something? You could also say the affirmative only gets to do one actor, so the negative should only get to do one actor. A lot of people will also say those cheater counterplans about consultation conditions and delay counterplans are unfair and uneducational, and they'll read theory arguments. And then a lot of people believe that if your counterplan is topical or if your counterplan is part of the resolution, that that is bad and should lose you the debate as well. Another common kind is plan inclusive counterplans are bad. They'll say that picks are unfair because they take away the affirmative's ground. And they'll say that they're uneducational because you don't learn as much about debating the specific parts of the plan because all the negative does is agree with it. There's also solvency advocate theory, which says that if the counterplan doesn't have a piece of evidence advocating for the exact thing that the counterplan text says you should do, that it shouldn't be listened to because it's not educational to debate about something that nobody actually thinks is a good idea in the real world. So now that we know the different theoretical reasons why a counterplan might be illegitimate, let's talk about an example of answering a counterplan based off of the one that we talked about earlier. Now, remember, the topic was Coach Abby should bring Coach Smith a soft drink. The affirmative plan is that Coach Abby should bring Coach Smith a Dr. Pepper, and they said that would be good idea, or we said as the affirmative that would be a good idea because it's refreshing, it would give us energy, and it would give us friendship. And then the negative read a counterplan that says instead Coach Abby should bring Coach Smith a protein shake. So we can answer this through the POST acronym. So permutation, Abby should bring Coach Smith a Dr. Pepper and a protein shake. So you say we can do both at the same time. Offense is reasons why bringing a protein shake is a bad idea. So you could say it's really expensive and Coach Abby is a recently graduated poor college student who can't afford one, so we shouldn't buy protein shakes. Solvency deficit, or why the counterplan won't solve as good as the regular plan. Coach Smith hates protein shakes, so he wouldn't drink it, which means he won't be refreshed, he won't have energy, and he won't have friendship. It will just go to waste. And then lastly, theory argument. This is weird and wouldn't make any sense, but you could argue that protein shakes are a soft drink, like not a carbonated drink, but a drink that is soft. And so the counterplan isn't fair because it's another example of the affirmative side, not of the negative side. So that is the end of this video, all about counterplans as part of our Poleasy series that makes learning policy debate easy. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments, and I wish you the best of luck in your future counterplan debates.